We are opening with a whopper. I was originally going to be a part of this presentation today, but I'm actually just going to do the introductions and leave it to the professionals. We have Joseph Goins and Cheryl Lemke, and I want to introduce them to you. I've been working pretty closely with both of them for the past 6-8 months or so on a number of topics that relate to our 10-year strategic plan, but particularly around marketing and research, which often go hand in hand. So let me tell you a little bit about Joseph. Joseph went to school in Kentucky at Berea, got a master's at University of Tennessee, and a PhD from Vanderbilt. Has a really interesting background in the ed tech field. He has worked with a number of schools and organizations on integrating technology into classrooms to promote student achievement, teacher effectiveness, and leadership strategies for administrators. He's led sales and marketing and professional development efforts in markets across the U.S. and internationally, and is now working as an independent consultant, working with companies, schools, and educators to understand how to apply best practices and put research into practice. When we were looking at someone to work with to lead this, or to help us with this research and marketing strategy, we found Joseph, and it's been a wonderful working relationship. He's going to tell you a lot about what we've been working on. Joseph is also how we met Cheryl. Joseph and Cheryl have worked together quite a bit. Cheryl is the CEO of the Materi Group based out of Los Angeles. The Materi Group specializes in research, program evaluation, professional development, and systems thinking. Cheryl brings 25 years of experience to this as well, both in public service, working on policy and systems with high-level public leaders, as well as in the classroom. Her range of experience includes being a teacher, a state technology director, policy expert at a national education laboratory, executive director at a foundation, and associated superintendent for the Illinois State Board of Education. She's also the chief architect on the Future Ready dashboard used by the White House in its digital learning summits for school districts. And she's regularly commissioned to develop policy briefs, research briefs, and white papers by private sector technology companies, including Intel, Cisco, Apple, and Microsoft. So these two folks know what they're talking about, and it's a pleasure to have them here today. I was chatting with Joseph before we got started this morning, and he told me that he was talking with a team member of his one time, and she was really nervous to give a presentation. So he said, "Hey, don't worry, look, this is all about you." And she passed out. Joseph, it's all about you. Great way to start. That's right. I don't think this thing's going to work. Can you guys hear me if I just talk very loud? No. How's everybody doing? Good. Okay, is this better? Can you guys hear me now? Okay, well, I have to start with a couple of quick stories. So when I first started teaching, I had an education professor who told me that the student that learns the most is the one that's directly in front of you. So I was known as somebody who likes to walk because I got paranoid that nobody would learn unless I walked. But I don't know if I can get all the way back there in this presentation, so I'll try. The second thing is, I grew up here. I grew up 20 miles from here. And if you grow up here, there's 3 things you fall in love very early. Dolly Parton, the mountains, and UT football. Sorry for football fans. But I grew up here, and when I grew up here, Pigeon Forge was a place you stopped to get gas. That's to give you an idea of what it's grown to be since Dolly Parton got involved in this community. It's been amazing as somebody who grew up here to just see the growth in this area. So for me, it's very special to get a chance to do a project in my hometown. You know, I used to say I went to an elementary school that was called Forest Hill Mountaineers,
I went to a high school called Heritage High School Mountaineers, and then I went to Berea College, which is called Berea College Mountaineers. So for some reason, I can't escape being a mountaineer, I guess. But I'm excited. We started this project with Jeff, and when we started it, we really looked at, I told Jeff, I said, everything you guys do is nothing but goodness. We just got to start telling the story. Everything you guys do in this room is just good. And my job was to take all the good and figure out how to tell that story broadly, loudly, and effectively. So what we're going to try to talk about this morning is what we've been doing. So first I want to talk about why this really matters and where we're at as I look at the education market. Then we're going to look at the research, and then we're going to leave you with a lot of tools and support materials that you guys can take back to your communities. You guys can still hear me in the back, right? Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to start with a quick question, assuming this works. Not working, Jeff. Sorry. Santa?
First day.
Where's Sam? Sam. Okay, I know what the first slide says. I'll go ahead and wait. So, I'm going to ask you guys a question, and you guys shout it out. Who do we like to blame for society's problems? Quickly. Education, right? We constantly are looking at education to solve these huge macro problems, right? And as I look at research, we've been doing this for 50 years. We started by saying we got to fix high schools. And if we can just fix our high schools, education's going to work. And hopefully I'll get my slide to work here in a second. And then we said, okay, we've got to get down to the middle schools. And if we can fix these middle schools and get these kids ready for high school, then it's going to work. Well, take a guess where we're heading, right? All right, perfect, Sam. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me. Okay, so anybody read A Nation at Risk? 1980. What did it say? Our education system's completely failing, and if we don't overhaul the whole system, we won't be here in the year 2000. Well, it's 2016, and we're still here, right? No Child Left Behind. By the year 2014, no child was going to be left behind, correct? We kind of missed that, right? Anybody in this room ever heard of the Coleman Report? Raise your hand if you have. Good, so there's a few people. So James Coleman was hired by the president in 1966, right after we passed Title I. Largest ever study conducted in education, 650,000 students. We just celebrated the 50th year of the Coleman Report. And he was studied at the time, he was supposed to prove that if we gave education a whole lot more money, we'd fix the problem. So that was his original hypothesis. And he spent 3 years studying 650,000 students. Anybody want to take a guess what he found? Kind of found the opposite. What he found was that 2/3 of our learning is directly relatable to your family background and where you come from. So every time I hear somebody say we're going to fix public schools, I always cringe a little bit, because really what we've got to do is think about the 2/3 of learning that goes on outside of schools, right? And how do we engage parents? And so what you guys are doing is engaging parents. And I always laugh because he wrote that report in 1966, and we still struggle with that. So where are we going now? All right, Sam's back. So I started pulling some headlines from the last week. Now realize all of these headlines I'm pulling are less than a week old. Fixing public education, early childhood learning. So where are we heading? We keep moving the fence back, right? So as education looks to continue this cycle of, if we fix education, we'll fix it all. But this time I think they might be onto something. If we could get early enough and focus. So this was taken out of Newsweek, actually. Fixing public education. These were taken this week. And if you guys keep reading them, I'm just going to read the headlines. Education Week, June 6, 2017. States pre-K access. Funding is going upward. But what is not is the quality of the programs. And so as we'll see, funding's going through the roof, but what they haven't figured out is yet what's quality in early learning, right? And for the dollars and the impact that the Imagination Library has, it's just amazing for me to think we're spending $8,000 a kid for early learning, and for $24 they get access to books in the home, right? And so your impact is huge. Close kindergarten gap to close the equity gap. I saw that headline, I was like, oh my gosh, 4-year-olds are now responsible for the equity gap. What are we doing, right? It's pretty astonishing when you read these headlines. And then preschool social and emotional learning is now the new focus, right? So again, these were just taken this week. I just did a broad scan from this week to give you guys an idea of some of this research. So I wanted to show you something about early childhood to give you guys an idea of how fast this is going to grow over the next few years, and the opportunity I think everybody in this room has, and the people that are not in this room. So last year in 2015-2016, $7.5 billion were spent on preschool initiatives. That is a huge increase. If you go back and you look at just the last 10 years, we're talking almost 1,000% increase in this type of funding, right? That is huge, right? When you really think about the funding, and I'll show you a couple of states and what they're doing, but as you'll see, both the increase in the funding, they don't always correlate back to quality, right? And so again, we really got to stay focused on quality. And for those that are aware of K-12 spending, Title I this year, it was around $18 billion, I think. So we've gone, early childhood is getting close to the entire Title I budget, right, for the federal government. So when you think about it in terms like that, it's just a big funding spend, right? So last year, the National Institute for Early Education came out with a report called The State of Preschool. And they tried to analyze all of this data. And by the way, I'll send it to Jeff, and he can send it to everybody in this room, because they did a profile on every single state. So if you want to dive into your state, the state profiles are fascinating. But they really tried to look at what states were doing. So the first year they did this in 2002, only 2 states were serving 40% of their students. 70% in this year are now serving their students, right? So to give you an idea of what that looks like, in a matter of 14 years, we've gone from 2 states to, that's the norm now. We've got to serve 4-year-olds at a minimum, right? And and then down at the bottom, for those in the back that can't read it, 70% of 4-year-olds are now being served, and 18 states are now moving toward 3-year-olds. Right? So you'll start to see that trend keeps going down to 4, to 3, to 2, right? So, and to give you an idea, in 2002, we had 14% of the students served in some capacity of preschool. Last year, we were around 40% nationwide. To give you an idea of just the broad strokes of that. And let's look at, I'm going to skip through this slide and jump here. So again, 7.3 million. This gives you an idea to look at the funding per child that states and federal are spending. And for those in the back, I know you guys can't see this, but we're going to make this PowerPoint available. And also the report. The report is worth diving into. But you can get a sense, so on pre-K, almost $6,000 is the nationwide trend. So again, think about that, $6,000 per child. I told Jeff the other day, we've got to figure out a way to tell every state, make it 6,024. Right? How do we make it 6,024? And what you'll see is quality matters. So the state preschool group came out with 10 benchmarks, and right now we only have a few states that are hitting 6 of the 10 benchmarks on quality. So very few states are getting at the quality. They're spending the money, but they're not getting at quality and outcomes, right? So in a minute, when Cheryl walks through the research, there is so much research on what you guys are doing that I could make the argument that, wow, pound for pound, the work you guys are doing is so much more important than some of this other work, right? Parental engagement, early literacy, the love of reading, and the passion, and so on. So here's an example of California. I picked on California because I knew Cheryl was coming. So they have 133 students in the state of California enrolled in pre through K initiatives. And as a state, and again, if you'll look at the check marks, that's looking at what benchmarks do they actually hit. And again, so when you're looking at California, they don't quite hit them all. California this year alone is going to spend $731 million on preschool initiatives, right? So when you think about that, you think about the impact, and this is a $200 million increase from last year for just California. So again, as you follow the trends in education, as we keep moving this fence and we look at research and we say, wow, if we could just get to these early kids and get them prepared for kindergarten, they're also going to be looking for program recommendations that are validated through research that have an impact on student and parental engagement, right? And that's where you guys come into this room, right? I also wanted to show a state at the opposite end of that. Indiana. Anybody here from Indiana? Sorry, I don't mean to pick on your state. But to give you an idea, until 2015, Indiana had 0 programs at the state level funding early childhood, right? To show you how fast states are jumping into this conversation, Indiana had at 0, and now they're going to spend $9 million this year. Their average per child is $6,000, but they went from 0 state funding to $9 million in 2 years, right? And so to give you an idea, when you look at your states, it's also interesting and important to dive into this kind of information because your states are really starting to look for solutions. And Misty, where are you at? I talked to Misty last night. Hey, Misty, how you doing? The Striving Reader Grant was announced by the federal government. Now, the Striving Reader Grant's been around for a long time. It's where states have an opportunity to augment their state reading plan. They added a new category this year, birth to 5th grade. And again, that has never been an option for that grant. That's $30 million per state in federal grant dollars. But what they did is they went back and said, oh, we need to add birth to kindergarten as its own category to improve our literacy in our schools. And so you're even going to start to see it in federal programs like Striving Reading and programs like that that are adding an isolated category to that. So the first part I wanted to introduce you to is just kind of the state of this. And I always say education's a messy environment sometimes. We're all over the place sometimes. But if you follow these big macro trends, early childhood and funding and research is very important. And even in the current president's budget, he's pushed preschool as one of his major initiatives this year. So we'll see where that goes. Anyway, I want to give you guys that. I'm going to come back in just a minute and walk you guys through the support materials that hopefully capture that. But I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl. And what we've been doing is looking at all the research for the past year with Jeff. I always say, Jeff, it's been the best 18, 19 months of my life. To give you an idea how detailed Jeff and the quality of this group is, Jeff found a random apostrophe in an article and called me about it. He's like, you have this random apostrophe on there. I'm like, man, you guys are very detailed. You found a random stray mark on a brochure and actually found it. So very impressive. Cheryl.
Thanks, Joseph. I must tell you, it's a real pleasure to be working with the Imagination Library. Which direction do I go here?
Right.
And you know, from my background, I'm from a blue-collar family and the only one of 4 children to go to college. And my sense is that public education is the method and the avenue for so many of our children to have that kind of opportunity. And so it's really a pleasure to work with a program that actually does that. And I've tried to spend my 30 years in public education doing that kind of thing. Mostly it's been with educational technology, understanding that tech fluency is important, but we also look at that balance and making sure that that the reading opportunities and the physical is also there. What we've been doing for the last maybe 6 months is working with Jeff to actually conduct some research studies. We did 3 research studies, and I'd like to share just some highlights from those research studies with you today. One of them was actually just looking at what the Imagination Library partners have been doing in terms of conducting research studies across the nation. And there have actually been about 41 studies, and we'll talk a bit about those. We also did a study just generally about the programs that are out there that put books in homes and the impact that that's had. In addition to Imagination Library, there are some other programs as well internationally that do that. And some research has been conducted on those. And then the third one was just looking at literacy, early literacy, from 0 to 5, and beginning to understand what the good practices are that actually build students' capacity to become good readers at a really early level. You guys are pretty familiar, I think, with the Imagination Library, but you know that it's to inspire children to love reading and books. And when you, Joseph mentioned a little bit about the focus on social emotional engagement of students, the research is really clear now that when kids are socially and emotionally engaged in learning, that transfers directly over to cognitive growth. And so that's one of the reasons it's so important that we snuggle with kids when we're reading, and we make it a really positive experience, because that social emotional connection with reading actually transfers over to the cognitive. They provide the gift of literacy for all children, and that it's important to start at 0. Even though you wouldn't think so, it really is important to start that habit of mind to do reading consistently, and then supporting parents and educators. And Joseph gave you a few of these statistics about the 65% of public school students in 4th grade are not proficient in reading, and we need to do something about that. And obviously the nation is actually waking up to that and understanding we need to start early. And that if they don't read proficiently by 3rd grade, they're 4 times as likely to not be proficient readers in high school, and eventually not to get that diploma that they need. So what I'd like to talk with you about is really some of the research that we found. And obviously, the headline is there, How Parents Read to Children Matters. It's great that when parents and caregivers read to students, but there are so many other things that they can do with the small prompts and the questioning and the engagement of kids with the text and with the books and with the images and with the storytelling that's there. And that's really the messaging, I think, that we're trying to get at today. This headline talks about the fact that there is research, and this came out in 2015, where reading impacts children's brain development. I'm just going to stop for a minute and let you read that quote, and then I'll come back and talk about it.
We can't see it.
Can you see it in the back?
No.
Okay, let me read it. I apologize for reading to you. Reading exposure during the critical stage of development prior to kindergarten seems to have a meaningful, measurable impact on how a child's brain processes stories and may help predict reading success. And this is from Dr. John Hutton, who's in Cincinnati, by the way. This was in a periodical that came out from the American Academy of Pediatrics. This is huge. What Dr. Hutton did is he actually did MRI scans on 3 to 5-year-olds as they were reading. And what he found is that children who are in enriched, stimulating literacy environments within the home show increased activity in the brain, and in the parts of the brain that actually deal with imagery, with mental imagery, and also with narrative processing. And that's really critical, because those 2 things are very important for emerging literacy.
And Cheryl, Dr. Hutton speaks tomorrow.
Pardon me?
He speaks tomorrow.
Oh, fabulous. I didn't realize that, so great. Great introduction for him. And you can check to see if I was accurate about what I said, right? We also know that through the literature review that we've done, that there are things that parents actually can do to increase the literacy gains of 0 through 5. Relating stories to personal experiences. As you're reading, asking open-ended questions and prompting the child to tell the story in their own words. What we did with the research that we looked at from the 3 areas that I talked about is and by the way, this is not an eye test, I'm not expecting you to read this, but it is something for you to go back to and read, and it's in many of the brochures that Jeff has produced. One of the reasons it's important to actually develop a logic model, because it really needs to make sense about what we're doing with children and the expectations that we have for the outcomes that are happening. And so what we've done is we put in this first column, we've talked about inputs, which of course is the Imagination Library program. The strategies, what the parents actually do with the children as they're reading the books, and how often they read and how long they read, and the cues that they're taking from children to understand, what kinds of reading strategies to use. And then the short term, the intermediate, and the long term outcomes. And I think it's worth looking at because, of course, the long-term outcome is kindergarten readiness. But the short-term, is actually some of the strategies and the conditions that we set up. So like short-term might be that the student enjoys reading so much that at age 3 or 4, they actually go and seek out the books and they beg for reading time. I mean, it's that kind of thing that we're looking for. Whereas the intermediate are more of getting into the actual literacy strategies. So do they know their letters? Can they recognize that? Can they put things together in terms of words? What about the vocabulary? Can they retell the story in terms of comprehension? So it's that kind of thing is kind of the intermediate. And then, of course, the long term is the kindergarten strategies and readiness as we go. Again, not an eye test. I just want to show you that we actually have taken the research and translated into commonsensical things that parents can use. And so we did 3 different suggestions to parents, birth to 2 years, ages 2 to 3, and then ages 3 to 5. And we have suggestions, and I'm going to just talk briefly about those. We have one that says, how would you actually engage your child in reading, and then some strategies as well. So one is beginning reading to your child immediately, and this means that at 0, that you began those practices, and so they can continue on throughout life. It's really important that that bonding is there, and again, that social emotional connection as they're reading. Read to the child at least 5 days per week. What we're suggesting is that reading become just a natural way of being that happens every day. It's one of those things that's just a part of life. And third one is that you read books multiple times. I'd like to just make a quick comment about that. Anybody heard of the television program Blue's Clues? Do any of your kids like it? Yeah. I mention it because they did some really interesting studies when they introduced that television program in. And some of you probably know that one of the strategies that they use is that they repeat the same show 5 different times. And you may have wondered why they do that. It's based on research, because that kind of repetition matters for the developmental growth of 2 through 5-year-olds especially. And what they found is that, and they actually did very succinct studies on this, what they found is, and in the first day and the second day, kids mostly watched it, and they weren't interacting as much. by the third day, they were familiar enough with it that they began to engage with that program. And same thing with the fourth and fifth day. And so what they found is that whatever the students were actually learning through Blue's Clues, they were able to transfer that learning over to new situations. And that's one of the reasons that we suggest that books be read multiple times. So what they're reading and the decoding that they're doing and the comprehension and the reflection on the text is actually, we want that to transfer over. And so that's why the multiplicity is really, really important for that developmental level. Reading and snuggling, again, social emotional connection. Keep the books handy so that it's a part of their environment and they can go access it any time that they want to. It's really important that they do that, and then be flexible. Again, that positive social emotional engagement. So if a child is fussy, stop with the reading and move on to something else, because you really want that positive connection. If you get into, ages 2 through 3, and you'll see some repetition here. Begin reading to your child immediately. It's never too late and never too early. Read to your child at least 5 times and read multiple, and really a repetition of 0 through 2. But now we get into more of the strategies because the child is cognitively a bit further developed. So ask questions. And some of the questions that you ask should be yes and no, or specific questions that have a right and wrong answer. Some of them should be open-ended, kind of like, for example, have you ever felt the way that this character feels in the book, so that there's this personal connection. Notice letters, flip it so that the child actually initiates some of the work and the reading. Name it, and also chime in and encourage your child to read with you on familiar books, pointing things out. And you've all seen that evolution of children as they become readers. And the one 3 through 5 is, again, continuing to read 5 days per week and multiple times. It's very consistent. But now we have a few more strategies that we're suggesting. Think about it, that you actually, good readers actually stop themselves. And you as adults do this and probably don't even know that you're doing it. But good readers will be reading along, and if they hit something that causes them to think, they'll stop and they'll wonder, didn't I read something about that yesterday or last week, and I need to go look that up? What does this word mean? I wonder what the author meant by this. And in fact, I read grants for the National Science Foundation, and I was reading small business innovation grants a couple months ago, and there was actually one that we funded that was technological, that had kids reading online, and if they read too long and didn't stop, the program stopped them and gave them prompts, because it's so important that you interact with that text and think about it and bring in your prior knowledge to what's going on in that text. So make it relevant and personal, so you stop and ask the child if they've ever experienced that kind of a thing before, or maybe have the child predict what's going to happen next. Begin with sounds, and start helping the child to recognize sounds. Name it, read it, and encourage curiosity. So those are some things that we have here. All of these are based on solid research. Everything that you see in these 3 that we've done are based on solid research. 2 last things I'd like to just say to you is that we've done some Imagination Library reviews of research by partners, and we have a couple things that we found. One is that DPIL is getting it right. That having books in homes and having them accessible and having parents read consistently works. There's no question about that. The research is really clear, so congratulations to you and what you're doing. They found that one of the things we found is by looking at those 41 studies is one, those people, those communities that are actually using the Imagination Library are overwhelmingly happy with the program. And the longer the program goes on, the happier they get because they're seeing results. And that means that, and they not only ask parents about that, but they also ask preschool teachers, kindergarten teachers, and library media people, and all of them were really very overwhelmingly positive about the program. So that's one. Another one is that if you look at the research, the DPIL research, what you find is that it does make a difference in the home, that parents are reading more and more often and longer with their children. And that the third one is that they have a much more positive attitude about reading, and that carries over certainly to the students. So those three things we really found to have happen. About 35 of the 41 studies were more, they were actually more formative and more descriptive, whereas there are about four or five, maybe six even, that were actually more rigorous research, and all of them were positive. And finally, I'd like to give you an invitation to the DPIL partners. We've done a lot of work with Jeff, and Jeff's directed us to say, how could you make it easier for the partners to actually conduct research? So we've done a couple things. One is we have access to research briefs that talk about the types of research that you could do. Everything from descriptive, which is just saying how happy are people with this, and what are their perceptions of what's going on with the DPIL program, all the way over to experimental design studies where you look at a treatment group and a control group, and you control for variations and eventually understand what is actually causing the outcomes for the studies. So we have some descriptions of that. We also have access to the logic model. So I think you're probably aware that when you do conduct research studies, you have to figure out what the research questions are. And we've helped you do that by looking at what the expected outcomes would be. And of course, if you go from short-term, intermediate, and long-term, we're looking at the developmental process for reading. And so that's based on research, so it'd be a good place to start if you're looking for what research questions to ask. And then, yes?
Sorry, is there any research that's been done now on the second type, the experimental design, and have you looked at the outcomes with kids that are participating in the program and kids that are not?
Yeah, yes, there were 4 studies that were, they were quasi-experimental design where they had treatment and control groups, and the results were very positive for 3 of those programs. The 4th was pretty flat, but 3 of them, it actually showed when you compared students who were in the DPIL program to those that were not, that the students in the, or excuse me, I call them students, the children in the DPIL program actually made significantly better gains in pre-literacy than others. Good question. And so that the logic model I talked about, and then finally, what Jeff's asked us to do is to actually put research templates together. So if you want to conduct a descriptive study, we have kind of the steps that you would take to do that. If you want to do quasi-experimental, we have the steps to do that. So those templates are going to be ready and available, right? And lastly, I'd just like to say that that DPIL is getting it right. One of the things that I'm hoping the research that we've done will do is help with those 3 caregiver guides that I showed you for 0 through 2, 2 through 3, and 3 through 5, is that there are explicitly things that parents can do as they're reading with their children that make a huge difference in the pre-literacy skills that they're building. And so if we can make that available to you so that parents begin to use it, we'll get even better outcomes from the DPIL program. So thanks. I'm going to turn this back over to Joseph, and he's going to talk you through a few of the resources that are available.
All right, since it's still morning, let's take a 1-minute break. I want everybody to stand up. Just make sure we're awake. Look to your neighbor and tell them your favorite book for 1 minute. Should have excluded that one. By the way, mine was The Power of One. Anybody ever read it? Bryce Courtney? Still my favorite book. Have you ever picked it up? Pick it up. One of the reasons I like to talk about books, the National Dropout Prevention Center came out with a report to where they looked at how do we reduce dropouts and where should we spend our money. And I usually pull this up on some slides to talk about. But one of the things they found, the single biggest thing you can do to reduce dropouts if you're in school, and I know this doesn't involve early childhood, was exploration, right? And I always think, we think it's the opposite. We think if you're about to drop out, we're going to make you take 2 math classes. And I always laugh because if I'm at risk of dropping out, I'm going to make you do something you hate twice. But I always found it fascinating that the National Dropout Center said if we can get kids to explore, open their minds, and see a pathway, and that's what books do. If we can get kids to see a future and a world outside of themselves, it really opens up a lot of doors, right? And again, you see it in early childhood, but you also see it on dropouts. The report is out of Clemson, so the National Dropout Center is out of Clemson. But it's fascinating. In fact, the top 3 things they recommended, number 1 was exploration, number 2 was family engagement, and number 3 was job shadowing. But I always think none of those are academic, right? They have nothing to do with academic focus. And in fact, the least thing you can do is academic tutoring. And I always go, wow, that's where we spend all our money, academic tutoring. We think it's more of the same, louder and longer kind of mantra, right? So anyway, I appreciate Cheryl doing that. And we'll take some questions at the end on that. I'm going to walk through how do we give you guys materials that you can now go out and tell these stories effectively. And we've tried to look at it as a systematic process. How do we give you tools that you can put in your hand, you can grab them, you can go talk to your community leaders, your education leaders, your business leaders, your funders, and have all of this just right at your fingertips. I'll remind you of the logic model. I think this is really important because it really validates the process that each of you guys are going through. So let's look at the support. So one of the things we've done that you will get is a comprehensive PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint, and again, this is just a visual of the slide deck. It's got 40 slides in it. I don't expect you to use all 40 slides in a presentation. But one of the things we did, the very first slide, when you use the PowerPoint, has these 5 squares. Every one of those takes you to that section in the PowerPoint. So if I'm doing a presentation and I just need to talk to the funders, I just click on funders and it takes me to that section of the PowerPoint. I don't even have to use the other slides, right? And the center slide with Dolly Parton takes you back to the beginning. So when you're using the PowerPoint, wherever I need to go, I click on that circle, and I have that section of the PowerPoint. Click on Dolly Parton, it takes me back to this slide. Okay? If I need to use the whole thing, you can go right through the whole thing. So it's very easy to navigate, but the idea was to say, here's a slide deck, 40 slides, everything related to these topics. So if I'm out meeting with business and community leaders and funders, I can say, okay, let me tell you about the Imagination Library. I click there, it gives you the overview. Let me tell you about the books, it gives you the overview. Let me tell you about how to become a partner. So you click on each one of those. And then the 4 relate to those people that you might be presenting to. Does that make sense? So you get a slide deck, got all these slides in it, but the most important thing I want you to remember is this very first slide right there, because it'll navigate you wherever you want to go. Does that make sense? I always say clear as mud, right? When I stopped putting how many versions we did of these. Because at one point I was up to version 8 and I was getting a little embarrassed. I said, okay, no more versions. We're just going to call it the PowerPoint. But we really did spend a lot of time editing this for you guys so that you guys would have tools that you could just run into your community, grab the PowerPoint, figure out what you need to present, okay? So you'll have all of this to use in your community. And I don't know how Jeff's going to disseminate this and make it available. But Jeff, I'll leave that up to you.
I'll talk about this.
So you have the PowerPoint. And again, when you're inside the PowerPoint, so I'm looking at the funders and policy part of the PowerPoint. Up in the top right-hand corner, you'll always see this little icon. Click on that and it takes you back, okay? So anytime you see that icon, you want to click on it, it takes you back to the beginning of the PowerPoint. You figure out a new section, okay? So we really tried to make it very friendly. So we also tried to do a very similar process, and if you notice, we're consistent with colors. So we also created 8 brochures that are leave behind. So you can use them all 8, or you can use the ones you want, but they are color coordinated to the PowerPoint as well. So if I am looking at a section on education and community leaders, it's green. The PowerPoint part will also be green, okay? And we have these already produced. They're leave behinds, and you guys can see the topics. I'll walk you through each one of these as well. And you know, Cheryl talked about those 3 research brochures for parents. Those will be available as well. Okay, so those are leave behind, so you can run to your communities. I don't know how Jeff's going to customize these for other countries. I know we've got London here, somebody, and we got Canada here. So we've got Kentucky. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, Jim. So here's the program overview. So the program overview just describes the features of the VPIL, right? So, and we really tried to make these 2 pages. They can be printed front or back, front and back, and you can give them out. And so you'll have a 2-page summary, but you'll notice we put this in there as well to describe the model and how it works, right? So very consistent in that look and feel from a color to the PowerPoint to your presentation, right? So trying to make it very user-friendly for you guys out in the field as you're trying to tell this story and as we try to grow the Imagination Library. Jeff, how soon will this be available?
We're going to put...
Jeff.
So we're going to make all of these available, the parent guides, the brochures, the PowerPoint, the templates that Cheryl mentioned, all are going to be available on the website. We are in the process of developing a new website that's not quite there yet. So these will probably make these available in the support center. And we can certainly send out a newsletter to all of our partners after this, after the conference, with linking you to where you can go get all of those resources. But they're all available in PDF, and you'll have access to everything. Or PDF or PowerPoint, of course.
Okay, and And we've also given the Imagination Library the original source files. So over time, if we need to change something, these can be edited fairly quickly and easy as well. So you've got one for affiliates and community partners. So you've got program overview, affiliates, educators and community leaders, funders and policymakers. And if you look at this, we put the logic model on this as well. So you're going to see some of the same themes over and over, right? How do we continue to share the logic model? How do we share our research? How do we tell our story consistently? And funders and policymakers, we put the process down here, including the cost of the program as well. And then books and selection, how are the books selected? And we may need to change one of the pictures on here, Jeff, I believe. I think we're going to change this picture right here. But we can make those changes fairly quickly now that all of this material's completed and done, and parents and caregivers. So we've got 8 of these, and the very last one is we did a research and support presentation as well, Leave Behind. So if you're meeting with a university, our community partners, and they're saying, well, how do we know if this is going to work? And they want to partner with a university to set up the research on the front end. We have a brochure on that as well, right? So when you're bringing these people together, a lot of people like what I call, tell me this isn't a risky decision for me, right? I don't want to risk. They want the risk removed. This will help because you can say, here's our logic model, here's our process, and if you want to do research, here's how you process that through the mechanism of whatever that state or community partner is, right? So you've got the PowerPoint, 8 brochures, including the research documents for parents that Jeff will make available. And it was an exciting project to really bring this together. I told Jeff, I said, I think we're at the point to where I think we just need to broadly and loudly tell the story, right? I travel the country. Only 3 states I haven't worked in: South Dakota, Wyoming, and Hawaii. I haven't figured out why Hawaii's on the list. I know why South Dakota and Wyoming are on the list. I do not know why Hawaii's on that list. But I go to states and they've never even heard of this. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe you've never even heard of this program, right? And so I think this will help tell the story to states and other partners throughout the country that need to be aware of what you guys are doing. I mean, we looked at the cost and the research this morning, and you think about these states that are willing to spend $7,000, $8,000 in programs that are getting such a small outcome versus a program that, for this cost and the impact you can have, it's tremendous to me. I'm only half joking when I say the message needs to be to every state, just add $24 to whatever you're doing, right, per kid, and we're good, right? And maybe we should try that, Jeff. 25. Somebody remind me it's 25. Dave likes that idea. Any questions? I'm going to stop here. And Jeff, I know you want to say a few words, but any questions on the research or the sales and marketing? I've done a lot of sales and marketing across the country for different companies, and I really tried to think through everything I've learned over 25 years of what would I want in my bag, right? I want leave behinds, I want a PowerPoint, something I could grab and go, and then I know exactly what I'm giving away. But any questions for us or Cheryl before I hand it over to Jeff?
I just say a comment that really is vital for us and has been in the UK is use the research and use it practically. And so lots of things that you're saying resonates with the things we've been doing. And there is a huge band of both research in the UK but internationally that just constantly proves and substantiates all that you're saying. So just comment.
That's great. That's great. So I'll hang way over here.
Has anybody done research that actually compared children who have received EPIL books for a substantial part of their pre-K experience with children who haven't on a ready for kindergarten evaluation or on a 3rd grade evaluation or a 5th grade evaluation?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they have. And what we find is that what those research studies tell you is that children who are in DPIL compared to children who are not have emergent research strategies and skills that are much higher. When you get into school and you look at, and kindergarten readiness even is a bit distal to what's going on here. So I think you need to be careful about that. That's why we put the logic model together that says direct incomes lead to intermediate incomes, outcomes which lead to long-term outcomes. And you have to trust the process. It's very difficult to connect books and homes to third grade reading because there are so many other factors that play into it. So I suggest that you be careful about that. And I don't know that there's anything that's connected, books and homes to reading in third grade. It's just too distal, if you will. But look at the logic model.
Explain the word distal.
Oh, distal is, it's just too distant that, if kids have books in homes from 0 to 5, you can actually look at the direct outcomes about what are the practices of this child. Is this child reaching for books more? Are they spending more time? And the language development, do they know their letters? Are they beginning to do decoding, etc.? So you can get a clear connection there, but when you then try to connect the books and home to reading, it's too far away. There's been so much time and so many other factors that have gone into it.
We have a question back here from the Governor's Books Referred, and I think they have a statement about the research that they've done that might be back in.
Great. Do you want to give me the mic?
You want the microphone?
Sure.
Whoever's back there, he's raising their hand.
Thank you. So who asked the question? I'm sorry. So I'm Theresa Carl. I'm president of Governor's Books for Birth Foundation, which is the organization that oversees Dolly Parton's Imagination Library program for the entire state of Tennessee. We do have a study that was done out of Shelby County, which is our largest Imagination Library affiliate. They mail 48,000 books a month. So they might be the largest in the entire thing. So there's an exploratory study done with Shelby County Public Schools and a nonprofit called Seeding Success. And we can send you to our website to get this information. And Jamila, will you kind of raise your hand? Jamila heads up that program, Jamila Wicks in the back, and she can tell you more. But in essence, and I say it was an exploratory study, which Dr. Goins, you will know what I'm saying. 19,000 children who had participated in the program. At some point, some for a shorter period of time, some for their entire 5-year stretch, were studied against their non-participating peers. These children are now in, I believe, 4th and 5th grade. The positive impacts as it related to their reading scores, their SAT 10 scores, Lexile scores, reading, math, both, were statistically significantly higher and continued to follow that trajectory throughout that period of time. In addition to that, and I have to be careful because I'm not a researcher, and so, I get excited and I might say something that's not true. So Jamila will stop me. But also the indication, I know you have to use certain words, the indication from that exploratory study was that those students had higher attendance rates and lower suspension rates. So those are two significant factors, one academic and one social. Yeah. So I just wanted to be sure you're aware of that, and I'll talk about it more this afternoon. Thank you.
And you guys have seen the research on books in the home, right? Everybody's seen that, right? Jeff, has everybody seen that? Low socioeconomic children have on average somewhere between 10 and 15 books in the home. I think the average affluent child has 300 books in the home. And depending on which research you're looking at, there's a big causality just in the books that are in the home, right? So I always say there's some good fallback strategies when you think about research, even if it's not directly related to DPIL. There are effective research studies that talk about we know the vocabulary gap, for example, in kindergarten, right? It's in the millions. What is it, 34 million? Is that right? 30 million?
Yes.
30 million? Yeah, it's 30 million, right? So average low socioeconomic child has a 30 million vocabulary gap by the time they start.
It's actually not vocabulary, but words.
Word, I'm sorry, word. Gap by the time they start kindergarten, right?
Okay, so I'm just wondering, I've been very involved for a couple decades in the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is the largest organization, representing over 60,000 early childhood professionals. And I am just thinking that these two organizations should partner, and that you guys should be keynote speakers at state conferences, at the national conference. There should be an article in Young Children Magazine, Macy's magazine, and maybe some of us could be, take a presentation like a PowerPoint and be presenters at for state conferences if you can't get to everyone. But that's a very important group for us to get the message out to, and I'm sure that they would love to take advantage of some of the materials. And NACY is changing its membership structure so that starting this next fall, winter, there's going to be a membership category for families, and their website even has been expanding information for families, but there could be a link, I would think, to this, but it just seems like a perfect marriage. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think somebody behind you had a question.
Oh, well,
Yes.
I'm curious. I mean, personally, I'm wondering when you visited my state of Michigan, who you talked with, but just generally for all of us, who do you meet with? You've gone to all of the states but 3. Are you invited in?
I'm sorry, in my company, we do other research too. So my company focuses on research, policy, and practice. So we've been to other states for other issues beyond Imagination Library. So
How
I'm
much have
sorry.
you done for Imagination Library?
About 14 months.
No, I mean, how many states have you visited specifically?
Texas, Puerto Rico, New Mexico.
Are you
yeah.
available Thursday? No.
Actually, I'm heading to Montana tomorrow.
I'm headed there in 2 weeks.
So Montana tomorrow. So yeah. Any other questions before I give it final questions? Yes.
I'm wondering if you have any research groups around social emotional, the connection between early literacy or the imagination library and social emotional success for children. I mean, it's a wonderful way to access child abuse prevention funds and other resources if we think beyond the cognitive success for children.
Do you know anything?
There is great research out on social emotional, and I mentioned to you that there's a direct research correlation to cognitive development. There's also really good literature on the teaching strategies that you can use to build social emotional engagement. I've never seen anything directly correlated to reading, but I haven't looked, from that perspective. So I certainly can. Yes, go ahead.
I was just wondering for the research efforts related to Imagination Library to focus on that and include a brief as a gateway to link to resources, financial resources.
It's a great idea, and we've talked with Jeff about potentially kind of moving in that direction. The other one that I'd like to mention that's connected to research, to social emotional engagement is the growth model. That as children are social emotionally engaged and they're learning, they actually create this mindset that through effort and hard work they can do whatever they set their minds to, versus the fixed model that says I was born dumb or smart and that's the way I am for life. And I think this whole program contributes to that growth model, which combined with social emotional connection and that positive look at and attitude towards reading really is very, very powerful. But talk to me a little bit later about the social emotional. I can give you some resources, or perhaps even add some resources to what Jeff is offering you.
One last thing I'll say is one of our goals with Jeff should be over the next year is to figure out if we can design a study to get into Waterworks Clearinghouse. For those that are familiar with it, it's becoming really more important to submit designs and studies that meet that criteria. And as you follow funding is starting to say we really want these studies to be, if you're not familiar with the Waterworks Clearinghouse, it's an education clearinghouse for research-based models that the federal government funds and supports. I still see hands, one more back there.
A great group that you could come and stick to would be the Frisky group, the Family Resource and Youth Service Centers. Because you're gonna have all your state coordinators there at that conference, and if you're not in that county, that would be a great pitch to those coordinators as to why. And this would be a great asset to them, because Kentucky is really pushing kindergarten readiness and early childhood education.
A great group to talk to in Kentucky would be the Family Resource and Youth Service Center coordinators. We have 2 conferences. There will be one in January, and there's one in October and November. And we all come together, and so that would be a great group to speak on if you're wanting to extend those this program into other counties in Kentucky, because Kentucky is really pushing kindergarten readiness, early childhood education. And they would be a great group to get to if you need to get them to like a local partner or whatever it would be.
That's the country of Kentucky, remember? I feel like Phil Donahue all of a sudden. For those that are old enough.
And I've got a question about the book selection process, actually. I work for the Dollywood Foundation in the UK, and we've been chatting to UK academics about this work. So firstly, we'd like to invite you over to meet all these academics. But secondly, one of them from the University of Bath was saying, have we done any research on the actual book selection process? She finds that area of our work really, really interesting. In terms of how we choose the books for each age and stage, and we make it so easy for families to understand child development through the age and stage of the books that they get through the post every month. And she said it would be really fascinating to look at that and share that more widely with academics as well. So I just wondered if that's going to be an area that we're looking at.
Jeff, I'm going to run back up to you, but I think Jeff and I have had multiple conversations about that topic, and I believe the process that the Imagination Library goes through is so thorough that I believe you could definitely highlight that research process, but I'll let Jeff talk about it.
Yeah, I want to talk just for a second in general about where we are with this. I mentioned at the start that we're in year 3 of a 10-year strategy, and part of the strategy was to figure out, or the main overarching goal that we had was to go from where we started, which was mailing books every month, to about 4% of every child under the age of 5 in the United States, and then consequent goals in other countries, similar goals in other countries, to 10%. So how do we mail a book to 1 out of every 10 children in the United States every month, which is, we're right now in the U.S., we're at about 1 million, a little over 1 million books a month. And so that means we would be making it to about 2 million books a month. So we have our work cut out for ourselves, but we still at that point would be mailing to 1 out of every 10. Part of the other strategy, as David often has said, is if we're mailing to 1 out of every 10 children, we want the other 9 to know about it. And so the strategies that we've been looking at involve how do we get our arms around the research to date on the Imagination Library and be able to tell that story really well. What have we done well? What have we not done well? What's right on the cusp of what should be done? And then equip you with tools, because most all of our research has come from all of you, right? It's the community research that we gather and try to distribute. So how do we equip you with all of that knowledge and make some suggestions to you as to where you might look next, and then give you the tools to do that? And that's really is the driver behind how a lot of this is coming together. So the logic model that Cheryl mentioned, for example, we've seen for years and years. I think there's a tendency, Joseph, can you pull that logic model up real quick? There's a tendency to want to, I think, mail Imagination Library books to children at home and immediately jump way out. Let me get to the, okay. Yeah, there's a tendency to want to do the input, right, which is mailing books, with the strategies, encouraging families to read to their children more often, and then jump way out here to show this, the long-term outcomes, kindergarten readiness, and even more so in like third grade reading, right? We're off the chart at that point. And the point of this, and the point of why this logic model is so important is because there's a lot more that happens in between here. And there's a lot of research that shows that if you can do this, then you can get here. And if you can do this, then you can get here. So you don't necessarily need to start with A and get to D, right? You need to start with A, and then show you can get to B, and B to C, and C to D. There's a lot of connecting the dots along the way. When you start getting out here into kindergarten readiness and even into third grade, Teresa mentioned a study that Memphis is doing. Syracuse has looked at a lot of this research as well. It's doable. It's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more expensive. You have to control for a lot of variables. It's very doable. And there are some folks that are working on that right now. The other thing that I wanted to mention, Joseph, will you pull one of the brochures up? The other thing that I wanted to mention about the brochures, actually, if you would stick on that one for 1 second, I'll get that home page. Yeah. So when we were thinking about what do we create and provide, we try to get our heads around who do we frequently talk to when we talk about the Imagination Library, because there's who do you talk to and then what do you say to them, right? And so we came up, this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but we came up with a group of people that we find ourselves regularly talking to. Funders and public leaders, parents, what we call validators, these are educators or non-traditional community leaders perhaps, and then community partners. A lot of you are involved with what we would consider a community partner. United Way, an organization that's helping us offer the Imagination Library or is engaged in some ancillary and support way. And so what we tried to produce, the brochures that Joseph showed you, are aimed at each one of these groups to speak specifically to them. We also found that as we talked about the Imagination Library, we typically talked about it in 2 different ways. We call it the head and the heart. So do you pull one of those brochures up that we can look at? So each one of these brochures, this is the program overview, and of course there's one for each one of those audiences. But each one of these brochures is essentially set up on the front page to speak to the heart of the Imagination Library. This is the passion, the inspiration, the love part behind the Imagination Library that's so important to not forget. It is at the home, really, of what we do. It's important for parents. We can talk about metrics all day long, but the really critical part of the Imagination Library is instilling a love and a passion around reading for mom and dad and that child when they sit down and spend time together. And we cannot forget that as part of what we do. As we grow the Imagination Library, we begin having conversations with large partners, state partners, large cities. We find, and as Joseph and Cheryl have mentioned, there's a lot of focus and attention that's moving earlier and earlier and earlier in a child's life. And so when you start putting bigger dollar amounts towards things, especially public dollars, the conversation tends to migrate more towards metrics. So we need to speak to the head part as well. So on each one of these brochures, on the back page, we talk to the head part. And so this is a lot more data and detail work, again, specifically aimed at the audience that we're trying to speak to. So of those 4 that we've created materials aimed at, for the parents and caregivers, for example, we not only have the brochure, if you happen to be talking to a group of parents, we have the brochure that you can leave behind that speaks to them directly, but we also have those reading guides for 0 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 5. Thank you. That you can leave with them as well. We have PDFs of those that you can email if you want to communicate with families. You can email them a PDF. It's a great thing to do. Same thing with researchers, for example. We have the brochures aimed at researchers. The templates that we'll get to you are not designed to make you a researcher. They're designed to help you have a conversation with somebody in your community that might be doing the research. If it's something simple, surveys that you want to communicate, that's all stuff that you can do. It's fairly easy to put together. If you happen to be fortunate enough to have a university in your community that wants to engage with you to take a look at the Imagination Library, we have some stuff that you can take to them that's going to help explain where we are. That's what these templates do. That's what the research summary does. And so we hope all of this is going to be helpful to you as we look at the next stage of this, which is, okay, we have our arms around who we want to talk to and generally what we want to say to them. We have our arms around the research that we have to date. The horizon for us is looking at where do we go next. And so a lot of the suggestions and ideas that you have are that where do we go next phase. And so we're going to be working with Cheryl and Joseph on that part very soon here. Yes, sir, you had a question?
I think I heard that last question around the book selection process.
Huh?
Research around book selection.
Right, we don't have any research planned around the book selection process itself. Yes, sir. And this is Dr. Waldron, who is going to be presenting his research tomorrow, or Thursday, sorry.
One just general comment going back to the book selection comment from the UK and the research about book selection. As someone that teaches a children's literature course at University of Michigan, many of the titles that are currently in the collection for the Imagination Library are award-winning children's books that have been vetted by outside researchers, dealing with social emotional themes, dealing with the structure of families and society and diversity. So a lot of those books already have recognition. If you go back to the Themes and Concepts Guide on the Foundation website, it can actually kind of guide you for some of the research that is out there on many of these books that have received awards, and that will be, I think, an important next step in the research.
It is indeed. Our book selection process, and we have a brochure that talks a little bit about this one as well, the books and the selection. But our book selection process, as many of you probably know, we have a small group of early childhood professionals, authors, that come together once a year. We put a few hundred books in front of them. They go through, we trap them in a room with some chocolate and coffee, and they read children's books. And they are all age selected according to a set of criteria that we have for the development level for that child. And so the process is generally this. We have the library for this year, for example. They go through and read all of the options for selection. They pick out the ones that they think fit the criteria, that they love, that they think is going to drive inspiration for mom and dad, as well as provide the tools that we want to provide them with. Because don't forget that if mom and dad don't love this process, it's not going to happen. So we try to provide books that inspire the process as well. And then they lay the books out, the ones that they think have been in there long enough, or there's another one that's come along that's really terrific that they want to replace it with. They'll switch them out, and at the end of this, they come up with the 6 groups, and it's always a really fabulous library. Interestingly enough, too, Joseph and I think Cheryl alluded to this, that we have, for the past couple of years, asked the parents what their favorite books were, and which books they didn't love as much, and so we have feedback from them as well. But the overwhelming response is that they love the titles. So I hope that addresses that just a bit. Yes, ma'am.
I am so excited about all of these resources, and I know our community will be able to put every one of them to use. I love the idea of some of us maybe taking the presentations to some of these conferences and outside sources and taking ownership ourselves. I do have a question about one of the brochures, the parent and caregiver one. Our affiliate site works with a lot of low literate adults who really want children's books in their homes. And that brochure looks like it's developed for a more high literate adult. Is there an opportunity to maybe have a version of it that would speak to a low literate parent?
Sure. We haven't. Do you know what grade level that was written at?
Probably about 7th or 8th. I mean, the idea was, yeah. We all know what we're talking about.
They couldn't hear. So the question was on the parent educator brochure.
Yeah, hold the mic closer, you're very difficult to hear.
Mary Ann, you can always keep this in line. The question was around the parent educator brochure. She was asked, we work with a lot of low literate adult parents, and could we work on a brochure that maybe can be targeted at parents who are lower, have lower rates? And I said, absolutely. There were a couple of other questions. Yes, ma'am. Let me pass you the microphone so you can everybody.
Hi, my name is Michelle, and I'm from Toledo, Ohio. And my question is that our program is 2 years old, and we have funding for 5 years for the zip codes that we're in. However, when we look at the research and we're talking with our funders, what they want to know is this going to work here? They really want to know what works. Is it going to work here? Based on what you're saying about the logic model, I'm not going to be able to prove in 4 years or 3 years that my kindergarten and my call scores have increased based upon these students being in Imagination Library and these students not. So how do us as local affiliates, do we focus on our parent surveys so that we're in those first 2 phases of the logic model? Is that enough research to show the program is successful? I'm just looking to see what advice do you have for us, because we all can't go out and get universities to come to our local community and say, oh, I want you to do this research and prove that this is working in our community. For me, and I am an educational researcher, I look at all of these studies and I want to say, isn't this all data from all these other areas? Isn't this enough to prove that it's going to work here too? But a lot of people that are funding, they want to see that it's working here.
Right.
So I'm just looking for what type of advice you have for us.
So this is a very common conversation that I've had with many of our partners. One of the challenges with the Imagination Library research is that we can show the best data and the best research from wherever, and everybody wants to know about, yeah, but what about my kids? Because my kids are unique and special, and they are. Right? But this is a very common question that we get, and it's one of the drivers behind why we wanted to create the templates, show you some options for some less sophisticated ways to approach research, all the way up to some much more sophisticated ways to do research. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. The other challenge with the Imagination Library and our community partners is some of them are very small, and some of them are very large, and the range of resources that they have access to is vast. So creating materials that cover all of the bases is a challenge, but we're trying. So I would encourage you to, if you're interested in doing, if you have a unique challenge, I have a time window that I'm working in, and I need to prove that the Imagination Library works. We need to figure out what works means for you, and then help you design something that can, I assume what you're seeking ultimately is funding to sustain the Imagination Library for years into the future. So I guess it would be a combination of looking at funding sources, what works means for your community, and then figuring out a solution for you. But it's almost going to have to be done on a case-by-case basis. Cheryl or Joseph, did you guys have anything else that any other thoughts on that in terms of treatments?
I'd just like to add that I think that logic model is so important, and the parent or the caregiver's guides are all research-based, and so hopefully that message can go out to your funders that it's logical that if parents actually do these things, this actually will happen, and then you get from direct outcomes to intermediate to long-term. It's expensive to do the kind of research, you're a researcher, to do the kind of research that you're suggesting. The other thing I'd suggest is that if you are planning to do research, I suggest that you contact Jeff to see what others are doing in terms of research questions, what others are doing in terms of research design, and what others are doing in terms of research measurements, so that you're not reinventing the wheel, but and perhaps there should be a convening of researchers around DPIL, so that there is some sharing there, which will be an economy of scale.
We have 1 minute, so I'll take one more question. I know you had your hand up for quite a while. Yes, ma'am.
From a funder's chair, my question is, on the brochures and the tips that you are making available, is the funder's logo going to be able to add it on to any of that material? On the printed, like if we print off those brochures?
Right now they're a PDF, so they're not customizable. I suppose if you have a unique situation where you would, for some reason, like to add a funder's logo onto one of those brochures, just reach out and let me know why and who it is and what we're after. So let's give a round of applause. Cheryl.